favorite mechanic from game, I actually go all the way to really basic thing, which is just traversal. Very easily we just forget how incredible it is.
For many years now, I have been described by Joe as liking boring games, which he somewhat jokingly but mostly seriously uses to describe the likes of games that are lighter on gameplay, particularly combat, but emphasize exploration, world, and vibes. These have come to be known as Jameson games, and for a long time I've tried to figure out exactly what it is about these Jameson games that click with me so much and why I'm consistently drawn to them. Over the last year, I've come to realize the answer. It turns out it's a simple truth about both games and life itself. Walking is good. Sam Lake is right with what he said a minute ago. Traversal is amazing. In the real world, walking is a remarkably complex series of tasks that the brain and body pull off subconsciously and, most of the time, effortlessly. The act of putting one foot down in front of the other, then lifting your back foot that tiny distance from the ground, then placing it just the right distance down ahead of you, and repeating thousands of times a day without having to ever think about it is a heck of a thing to pull off. Likewise, in games, programmers, artists, animators, and designers, they all work together to create a series of systems that hopefully replicates in a game that which we do with such ease in reality. All for it to result in the basest level of gameplay. Push the stick forward and the character walks, and we think nothing of it. As games continue to advance with technology, the quality and vividity of their worlds has reached some truly stunning levels over the last 10 years, and as I get older, I find myself increasingly drawn to games that understand and even relish in the quiet pleasures of navigating from A to B. When I look back across the years at the games I've come to love the most, they all have something in common, which is that large amounts of playtime were simply spent traversing their worlds. I think back and fondly remember the stories of these games, but I just as fondly recall the time spent doing next to nothing, where I was walking from one place to another. Those moments spent in the fields of Ardskelig, or navigating the lush, untouched forests of Bohemia, or walking up the steps of the general store in Valentine, or hearing the airy piano as I traversed the plains of Hyrule. All those moments of going from place to place were pivotal to my enjoyment of those games, and no series of late has been more interested in the simple act of going from one place to another than Death Stranding. When the game first released in 2019, I was struck by how much pleasure I took in making my way from one city to another, delivering packages to the holographic denizens of this post-apocalyptic America. As the game progressed, more pleasure was found trekking high through the mountains, establishing networks of zip lines, or working with others to rebuild the game's highway systems. As much as I enjoyed the act of walking in the first game, the full progression of technological advancements you went through in the first game made for an incredibly compelling experience that combined traversal and delivery. At the time of reviewing the game in 2019, I was also extremely critical of all the other aspects of that game that got in the way of those two core pillars. The combat and stealth systems were a tiresome distraction from what I wanted to do most, and through many of the game's languid exposition dumps passing a story, I wanted only to be done with them and to get back to traversing those craggy, primordial landscapes. As Joe and I, alongside our good friends Ben and Dawson, all played through the game at the same time and shared our journeys over Discord, one of us made a bold decision to fully commit to what he thought was the game's greatest strength. For reasons that, at the time, truly baffled me and the rest of our group, our sweet friend Benjamin announced that he was navigating through Death Stranding exclusively in one manner. Yes, the absolute madman decided to embrace the true life of a porter and make every delivery on foot. No matter how treacherous, no matter how heavy, no matter how far, his feet would carry him there. It's probably not surprising to hear that our friend group reacted rather strongly to this decision, and Ben has suffered much teasing from us over the subsequent 6 years, but as time has marched on, and as I've continued thinking about Ben's tales of playing the game this way, I've come to realize that this was an inspired challenge to take on, and more importantly, I've come to understand why he did this. In fact, I think he may have been onto something rather brilliant with the entire ridiculous idea. Granted, he was also on something at the time, but that's besides the point. Also beside the point is the fact that he never even got close to beating the first game despite putting like 150 hours into it. While working on this video, I realized I had to do something important before continuing, which was to get Ben on a Discord call and ask him a simple question. Why? Why did he decide to walk everywhere when there were all these other great means of getting around? What was the reason behind this madness?
I think it really started when I thought that the game kind of presented walking as the game. So it kind of got to a point where when I came across the vehicle for the first time, I believe it's the Tri-Cruiser, I almost looked at it with cynicism as some type of cop-out. I looked at it as a challenge to continue on foot once I saw vehicles were being introduced to the game. I think the thing that kind of took me by surprise the most about it was only just recently heard the term about play expression and how people kind of interact with games and are able to express themselves through it. And Death Stranding 1 was definitely one of those games where I felt like I was playing it in a way that was inherently to me. Something about just walking, whether it was straight from A to B or choosing a more treacherous path through a mountain pass or a BT area. I just wanted that challenge, and I really started to feel that loop develop. There would be this quiet little moment of dread just before a really big run, and I really did liken that to, you know, that thing that you were about to do in real life. That little, you know, I heard a saying at some point that said the hardest part about going on a walk is putting your shoes on, and I definitely, you know, would be feeling that sentiment before a particularly long journey across Death Stranding. But it was always just so satisfying, just taking it in, getting from one spot to the next, and discovering things that other people had left there or taken with them. I definitely found it to be resonant with me as a person. I think that's just why I kept doing it.
So ultimately for Ben, it just made sense to do this. It felt right to him. And it took me playing a ton of Death Stranding 2 and going through a period of extreme burnout from work to end up understanding why exactly it just makes sense. I was extremely excited for Death Stranding 2. Despite my many issues with the first game, once 2 was announced, I was 100% on board. I deliberately stayed dark on the game and avoided all coverage of it after that initial reveal trailer. I anticipated a ton of improvements and additions to the challenges of traversing the world and solutions to overcoming those challenges. I saw indications of natural disasters in the form of flooding and earthquakes, and my mind raced imagining exactly what this would mean for the traversal and delivery gameplay loop, and what else the game may have in store that I hadn't even glimpsed. Unfortunately, after getting through the game's lengthy tutorial and putting a good 8 hours into it, I was starting to feel disappointed. Immediately, everything was so familiar, and I kept expecting more to open up, more challenges to arise. Yet, as I continued to play past the dozen-hour mark, nothing came up. The natural disasters were surface-level events that mostly played out during scripted story moments as part of tutorials. An earthquake would hit here or there and I'd stand my ground for a moment, then move on. A river might flood, but never so quickly that I was caught in the rising torrent, nor so dramatically that it would wash away my structures or become impassable by ladder or bridge. A wildfire would break out during a story moment, and then I never saw one again. A dust storm might hit and hinder my visibility, but none of it mattered because I was comfortably cruising along in a pickup truck. After 20 hours, I'd come to fully realize the issue. Death Stranding 2 was too easy, it was too forgiving, and it was too generous for what I wanted. Rare was the time where I'd round a corner and not already find a dozen player structures built for me, solving every conceivable problem the landscape could muster, and soon I was heading out on deliveries without any gear whatsoever. No ladders, no climbing anchors, nothing. I had all I needed in the form of the tri-cruiser or the off-road pickup truck. This is where the ultimate problems lie with Death Stranding 2 for me. The world is simply too easy to navigate using the two main vehicles. Then when you pair the robustness of those vehicles with what feels like an overtuned shared structure system, the entire game starts to feel like a problem that's already been solved. I had gone into Death Stranding 2 incredibly excited for not just the game systems and expectations of innovation, but also looking forward to the simple, slow relaxation the game would provide. I needed a game to slow myself down and break some bad work habits with, and Death Stranding 2 was supposed to be it. You see, over the last year, I've found myself increasingly failing at managing to balance work with life, to the point of getting rather unhappy with this entire YouTube endeavor over the last few months. We tend to keep a fair bit of distance between our private lives and what we present to you through our videos. Part of that is out of a desire for privacy, but I think most of it is out of the fact that at the end of the day, we're here to bring you entertainment, and that's ultimately what matters most to me. If I can make a video you've enjoyed watching for any reason, then I've succeeded, and the behind the scenes stuff doesn't really matter so much. But behind the scenes stuff is life stuff, and so it does matter. And it turns out it's a surprisingly difficult thing to maintain a YouTube channel like ours for years and years. Soon to be decades and decades, actually. Much happens that you will never be privy to behind the scenes, and that's fine, but I had recently found myself unable to think or do much of anything that was not work, without also worrying about work and what the next video project would be, and if it would be received well. I had slowly started to improve this part of myself lately, particularly by going on regular walks, and by spending time in games that offer that similar quiet comfort to walking, and I had hoped to use Death Stranding 2 as a continuation of that sort of meditative reset I was in need of. Unfortunately, while I was progressing through 2 and only half finding that internal quiet I was looking for, along came a sponsored video assignment, one that was focused on Death Stranding 2 itself. It had a very quick turnaround time, and while the video itself turned out well, with everyone happy with the final product, me included, it was a surprisingly grueling 4-day effort that came as the finale to a multi-month long period of me overworking myself at the expense of my own well-being. And the end result was that ultimately that sponsored work project had turned my comfort game into a source of stress and exhaustion. Such is the way of the gaming YouTube world sometimes. A game may turn from something we're playing for fun into a work game, and once that transition happens, I've always found it nigh on impossible to convert it back from a work game to a fun game. I was frankly upset by the entire thing. I was upset by the fact that Death Stranding 2 had left me cold due to its familiarity and lack of challenge, but I was more upset at myself for overworking and overstressing on a project to the point of ruining a game I had been looking forward to having just for myself. After a few days off and many long walks on my own, working to cool myself down and get into a better headspace, I decided to return to Death Stranding 2 with a new idea of how to approach it. A way for me to continue to calm myself down, and a way to get more out of a game that I was trying and failing to enjoy. I made the decision Ben made long ago. I would literally follow in his footsteps. I turned the difficulty up to max, I put on fresh boots, and I set out on my own pilgrimage. No tri-cruiser, no off-road pickup truck. From now on, wherever I had to go in Death Stranding 2, I would get there by the power of my own two legs. Now, having put another 20 hours into the game with the restriction of no vehicles, I've come to the conclusion that this is the way the game is meant to be played for me. It's remarkable how different of an experience the entire game becomes. Brutal difficulty hasn't changed as much as I thought. I think this is primarily focused on combat difficulty, which I do my best to avoid, and when I am engaging with combat, I've opted for pure pacifism, and that's been fun. But the difficulty change has more noticeably increased the frequency of weather events, along with the stamina drain rate and footwear wearing out substantially faster. It's a nice bit of extra challenge, but the real change comes from abandoning the vehicles. By walking everywhere, I find myself appreciating the game's systems so much more. What used to be a simple 3-minute drive is now a 10-minute walk where I have to constantly be assessing the path I'm on and where I'm going, looking ahead to upcoming obstacles and planning my way around them. When I come to an impasse and either build my way across it or divert my route to a nearby structure someone else has built, that unique satisfaction of the series comes back to life. I completely understand now what Ben meant when he said it just makes sense to walk everywhere. To me, the game feels designed around the challenges that come up when on foot. When fully loaded with cargo, a single small rock can spell disaster should you not be paying attention and trip over it. Crossing a river becomes an ordeal, especially when one is flooding. Getting up a mountain is tedious and exhausting, and finally making it to the delivery point up there brings an immense level of satisfaction and relief. Enemy camps are now something to be avoided completely and push you out into suboptimal terrain, which again brings more interactions with building structures and finding your perfect path. Weather now matters. Timefall on brutal difficulty rapidly degrades cargo, and by walking, you're spending more time in the timefall, so cargo degradation as a mechanic you have to worry about becomes important once again. Every expedition, no matter the distance, requires careful route planning alongside proper gear preparation. The entire game just makes more sense when it's played this way. There's also another benefit to having made this choice. My brain is simultaneously more engaged, but also freer to wander in thought. When driving in Death Stranding, as is often the case in real life, there's a certain level of mindlessness. You're always engaged in the acts of accelerating, braking, steering, checking your surroundings and all that, but the path you're on when driving is set by the lanes and the world surrounding you. Or in the case of Death Stranding 2, if I'm not on the highways, everything feels like a viable path. The result for me in 2 is a complete lack of challenge when driving, which makes my eyes glaze over and my thoughts go blank. But when walking, both in video games and in real life, my brain is so much happier. There's the satisfaction of finding your own way from A to B, but there's also the freedom that comes from your subconscious knowing exactly what it has to do to walk, that you don't have to think about the actual actions. Combined with the physical act of movement, my brain wanders happily through a great many paths. I can process the previous day, plan the next one, think of solutions to problems we're facing with video production, come up with weird ideas for videos like this, and even write them while walking. It's an incredibly calming act in reality, one that has been studied and proven many times to be a deeply good thing for your brain and body to be doing. It's something I think we all hopefully understand the value of, and if you don't yet understand that value, I hope you do eventually. I have increasingly found similar pleasures in walking in games. There is still nothing as good as a real walk, especially one that takes you out into the beautiful world, but walking in games, I find my brain wandering in similarly productive and positive ways. There's a constant hum of activity going on in my brain as I push Norman Reedus through the environs of Mexico and Australia, and the same goes for the many games I've loved over the years where I'm free to wander. The space between spaces is the time where I'm at my most relaxed in games, and games like Death Stranding 1 and 2 are, for me, games about finding comfort and pleasure in those spaces. I would be curious to one day see the act of walking in games studied in the same way walking in the real world has been studied. I wonder if similarly positive effects come about for the brain when forced to absorb nature and movement in a virtual world. The soundscapes, vistas, and sense of place get ever more believable in games as the technology and artistry continues to progress, and I wouldn't be surprised if some part of the brain is being tricked by that immersion to feel similarly to how it feels when walking in real life. Now, I want to be clear here, I am not saying everyone should play this way, or that walking everywhere is what the game should force on you. It's the right way for me to play. If you're happy breezing along and taking pleasure in the efficiency and ease of vehicle travel, that's great. That's why games like these are so neat. And I should say, between deliveries to outposts, I am regularly making deliveries of materials to aid in the paving over of Australia. Let there be roads. They aren't for me, but they can certainly be for you, and it brings me a different form of joy and comfort to know that somewhere out there, someone has benefited from my work, even if it's of little use to me. It's unfortunate that I had to take rather extreme measures to bring to the surface that same enjoyment I got out of the first game. Death Stranding 2 is an obviously better game in almost every way than the first game. There are a ton of tiny quality of life improvements, lots of fun new upgrades and gizmos to chase, it's bigger and prettier of course, but the balance is undeniably off. It's too similar to the first game and too easy to make your way through. The version of Death Stranding 2 I wanted was one that doubled down on traversal and delivery and the challenges of making it from A to B. My ideal version of Death Stranding 2 has no combat and minimal story, and it's entirely about navigating through nature and all the potential risks that come with that. But that's not the game that was made, and that's fine. A game like this is massively expensive to produce and needs to appeal to many, many people now more than ever as the industry itself stands on unstable feet. I'm still disappointed in the game, rather seriously so in fact, but by slowing down and following in Ben's insane footsteps, I've managed to find a way to appreciate once again the core of what makes these games so brilliant, and there's still nothing else like it. I've also managed to slow myself down and get into a much better mental space, and am going to continue walking everywhere in Death Stranding 2 until I've had my fill. Maybe I'll beat the game, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll play it for the next year or 2 or 3. Maybe I'm never going to touch it again after I've made this video. I'm not really sure, but I'm very glad I made the decision to switch to walking. Before wrapping up the conversation Ben and I had about Death Stranding 1 and 2, the full version of which you can find on our podcast feed, we touched on the real-life job that inspired this series and how much it resonates now. In Ose National Park in Japan, and out of an effort to maintain the pristine nature of the area, the Bokka profession came into being. No roads have ever been built through there, and horses stopped being used to service the park's lodges back in the 50s due to environmental concerns, and instead of disruptive helicopter deliveries, human porters haul supplies through marshes and mountains using nothing but their own 2 feet.
I've seen this lately, and this specific imagery is so interesting to me, and it's so important. He's got produce. This person has life. They're transporting life to a village or to a community that needs it.
Like to F1 West Fort Knott.
Yeah, exactly. But that's just it. Like you are bringing good, and it's amazing to me. It's human to human. I love it.
This is why that first game took on such a different shape when the pandemic hit, and it's why the series still feels wholly unique. It's a game about traversing from one place to another, and about finding joy in how you take that journey. But it's also a game about helping each other out. Bring people their packages, contribute materials to the collective road and monorail rebuilding efforts, place zip lines and bridges to help someone else cross a gap, leave a sign and remind everyone to keep on keeping on. There's nothing quite like Death Stranding, and I think it's something everyone should play at least once to see if there is something in there for you to take comfort in. Life can be hard. It's felt especially taxing over the last few years, but I think 2 simple things consistently will make it better. Look out for each other and go for a walk.